I'd like to welcome everyone to Conversations About Carbon. This is a monthly series hosted by Iowa State's Bioeconomy Institute, as well as the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jim Jordahl. I'm on staff here at the Institute. The goal of Conversations About Carbon is to bring people together for an informal discussion around concepts of carbon reduction and removal, and to discuss the role that agriculture can play as a climate change solution. Opportunities and challenges in carbon reduction and removal are unfamiliar to a lot of people, so we want this to be educational and give you an opportunity to talk with experts and leaders in the field. We definitely want audience engagement. I'll begin with some initial questions for Ernie, but we'll transition to your questions in the Q&A that I'll moderate and share with Ernie. Overall, our session will be about 45 minutes. I'll spend the first 15, 20 minutes or so with some initial questions and then open it up to your questions via the Q&A part. Now I'd like to introduce Ernie Shea. Ernie is the president of Solutions from the Land, a not-for-profit organization that incubates and supports farmer-led multi-stakeholder platforms that inspire and educate and equip ag partners to innovate and lead efforts to sustain productivity, enhance climate resilience, and contribute to local and global climate goals for sustainable development. So welcome, Ernie, and so glad that you're here today.
Well, thanks, Jim. I'm glad I'm able to get here. I struggled to join a few minutes ago, but sure. Brooke came through and figured out another way to help me link up. So it's good to be with you, and it's good to be talking to you again, Jim. I know we were together on a webinar with some European Union, UK farmers back about 6 months ago. So it's good to reconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lisa Schulte-Moore sends her greetings and regrets. She's conflict teaching at this time. Just to kind of get things rolling today, our focus is on engaging farmer collaborators. But as this is a Conversations About Carbon theme, we'd like to think about, developing farmer collaborators kind of within the context of issues like decarbonization, renewable energy, changing climate, the need for climate resilience, and just the emergence of quite a complex landscape of lots of private sector carbon programs and USDA initiatives. And then this big carbon context or world, how is Solutions for the Land approaching farmer engagement in the US?
Well, that's a big question, and it goes to the heart, really, of our mission. We started as an entity back in 2004, bringing together well-known, highly networked farmers, ranchers, foresters across the country to start a big conversation about what's next for agriculture. And at the time, the focus was on clean energy, renewable energy. We were just coming off of 9/11. Oil dependency was a major national problem, and the United Nations Foundation started to ask the question, what might the agricultural sector do to help improve energy security, national security, and provide environmental benefits at the same time? So we started to think beyond food, feed, fiber, and began to think about, obviously, fuel, but also wind energy, solar energy, geothermal energy, low flow hydro, anything that a farmer, a rancher, a forest landowner might be able to harness off their land. And as we built kind of a national movement around that to create new opportunities, well, look what happened in Iowa. Iowa leads the nation in renewable energy production, and much of that is on farmland. So we found a lot of excitement, a lot of policymaker support. We coined the goal of 25% of the nation's total energy coming from agriculture and forestry by the year 2025, and that went on to be adopted under federal law as a national goal. We had 38 governors endorse the goal, 15 state legislatures, and looking back, the rest is history because we've come such a long way. But then we asked ourselves, going back to our farmer leaders, that question you started with, well, are we done? Is there anything else we do? And we began to realize that when we were producing clean energy, we were reducing carbon emissions. And then we started to think about the nexus with conservation practices. And while we're producing corn and beans for biofuel feedstocks, and we're using cover crops and no-till operations, boy, we can sequester a lot of carbon. So suddenly the lights came on and said, there's another way we can deliver goods and services, and that is through being climate smart in how we farm. So we started a migration into the carbon space. We then realized, though, that we were just scratching the surface. And the 21st century renaissance that we're helping to lead is about revaluing agriculture for all of the goods and services that the sector delivers. And we use the Global Sustainable Development Goals as our North Star. So the world back in 2015 said we want to improve life for 7+ billion people, going to be 10 billion by mid-century. And they articulated 17 big, audacious goals like ending hunger, cleaning up water, solving the climate crisis, improving livelihoods. And the lights came on and we said, the world cannot get there unless agriculture is successful. And agriculture cannot be successful unless farmers and ranchers and foresters are successful. So that's become our engine of driving transformational change so that producers are valued, recognized, and compensated in the 21st century for all of these goods and services. And it begins with one fundamental guiding principle, and that is that farmers need to be at the center of all discussions and decisions, whether it's around research needs, whether it's around enabling policies, whether it's around market mechanisms. You don't invent things and then go test them out with the farm community. You start by listening to what they need to be successful. And that's what we're about. Long-winded answer, but I hope that was helpful.
Oh, super helpful. Thanks, Ernie. That helps us understand some of the background and history and structure and goals. That's great. I understand that Solutions from the Land has an active group of leaders right here in Iowa, the Iowa Smart Agriculture Work Group. Can you tell us a bit about the people and activities here in Iowa?
Sure. Well, this is an example of how we operate, where we recruit, support, facilitate a group of self-directed farmer leaders and their partners that are ready for a longer-term look, a bigger conversation about their future and the future of agriculture. So the process we followed in Iowa is the same we followed in 7 or 8 other states, where we begin by recruiting a core anchor partner. And for us, that is always the land grant. So we met with the folks over at Iowa State. When Dan Robeson was coming on as dean, he quickly saw the value of this, and Solutions from the Land at Iowa State partnered. And we already had one of our board members right in the middle of Iowa, and that's Ray Gasser, who many of you know. Mm-hmm. And I remember Ray and I met with Dan, and the first assignment was for people to write down names on a piece of paper. So look across the state, think of folks that represent the diversity of Iowa agriculture. Think about where they are in their stage of life. Do they have the capacity to provide leadership, the time? And then let's reach out and invite them to see if they might have an interest in coming together and being a think tank, if you will. So Ray quickly identified a whole bunch of people. Dan and the Iowa State did as well. And we ended up with somewhere over 30 leaders that today comprise the Iowa Smart Agriculture Work Group. It's not a formal entity. It's not a NGO. They operate under our wing, but autonomously. So it's an ephemeral group of leaders that are not constrained by anybody. about what they talk about, what they come up with in the way of ideas. And today that work group is co-chaired by Ray Gasser, Brian Sievers, and Kelly Blair. And there are a couple of dozen other farmer leaders, value chain partners, anchored with our Iowa State research and extension partners that meet regularly and are working to make Iowa agriculture even better than it already is. So we didn't start with the notion that Iowa agriculture was broken.
Mhm.
We saw Iowa agriculture as the most efficient production platform on the planet. When you think about the big commodities that are grown there, and we think about the interconnectedness with agricultural production and clean energy and environmental outcomes, there's so much great work. But they said, we can do even more. And they started a process of thinking about what that looked like. And they adopted the same North Star that Solutions from the Land did, which is they said, we want to be valued for the outcomes that we produce. And those are quality of life, and they're the Sustainable Development Goals. Starting first in Iowa, but then obviously delivering those outcomes across the world. So they started with kind of a one-on-one discussion of assessing their current state, saw a lot of progress, saw room for improvement. And there's evidence of that, whether it's soil erosion, water quality challenges, farm profitability challenges. And they then began to think about a way they could further evolve, pivot, if you will, and transform so that the marketplace would reward them for the water that they filter and store, the biodiversity that they enhance, the habitat that they create, support for wildlife, the carbon that they sequester. And that became their focus of being valued in the marketplace for all of the things that a good farming operation provides. And then they actually sat down and they wrote a roadmap for what they need to get there. And if you haven't seen it, you can get it on our website, or we can send a link around. The report they wrote is Iowa Smart Agriculture, Circles of Life, a Vision for the Future. I just happen to have a copy right here that you may have seen. And it's a collection of stories, first and foremost, of farmer leaders that have been experimenting, piloting, innovating, and offering their thoughts and recommendations that were then processed by the entire work group and ended up with recommendations that we're offering to other farmers, to the value chain, to policymakers, to our research partners. Anybody that's connected to agriculture is invited to read this report. And it was such a real pleasure working with these people, because so often we get wrapped up in today and there's an immediate policy crisis that we have to solve. And oftentimes we're in a defensive position that, well, we have to make sure we're protecting ourselves from whoever's trying to impose something on the sector. But these folks said, let's not constrain ourselves today. Let's think long-term. And that's what they did. And they created, we think, a phenomenal roadmap. And the heart of it is utilizing what other industries have done in the form of circular production systems to transform and pivot in a way that makes them even more profitable, more efficient, more effective. So a key pathway to moving from the old linear model, which is described as taking resources, making something, and disposing, to the circular system, which is really about make, use, retain value, and recycle. And applying that to 21st century agriculture is what they have done in this report. So it's really an exciting body of work.
Fantastic. It is a very interesting and well put together report. Maybe in the Q&A or the chat, Broker Dana could post a link to that if we get a chance. In terms of trying to expand that group here in Iowa, and maybe to engage other farmer collaborators, the ISU process, definitely sound like it was quite effective, but any thoughts on expanding that collaborator group for possibly other initiatives, how to go about that based on your experience?
Well, that's exactly where they are in Iowa. So they produced a document, not just to produce a document, walk away, but to start a conversation. So they have gone down two paths. The first is that they're going to hold a forum on June 6th and 7th at the World Food Prize Foundation building and share this work and invite a bigger conversation around the pathways that they've identified with an eye towards getting other farmer leaders and organizations to participate and forge consensus on the most important action steps that need to be taken. These folks are smart enough to know they don't know everything. So they've said, here's what we've come up with. We want to share it, but we invite additional input and conversations. So we've got a wonderful program lined up. I think the announcement will be coming out probably next week, but it's going to involve a very focused conversation about the circular economy as it applies to agriculture, with examples being shared by producers that have been experimenting with these systems. We're going to have a reactor panel of agricultural leaders that will offer their insight and perspective. We've confirmed the governor, Mike Naig, the Secretary of Agriculture, Debbie Durham from the Department of Economic Development. The dean is going to be speaking. We have two World Food Prize presidents, former ambassadors that will be in the room with us, Ambassador Quinn and Ambassador Branstad, kicking off this event. And we're going to cover a range of topics from how do we be relevant in solving hunger problems in the state, to how do we be relevant in solving economic challenges and making agriculture even more viable and profitable. We're going to talk about how we can be improving the environment and delivering high value ecosystem services, including climate services. So it's going to be a really fun day.
Looking forward to that. Hope a bunch of people online can take part in that as well.
And Jim, the second path, so that's the first path. That's
okay.
An event. The second path, we're still putting together, but it's partnering with Iowa State Extension and beginning to hold a series of listening sessions around the state where we bring together smaller groups of people. And as the word means listen, it means listen. We're going to ask a few questions and sit back and take notes, because there's no better life lesson than to hear from a producer on the ground. So our extension partners are going to be helping us schedule these this summer. And we're hoping that our commodity group partners and our value chain partners will as well. So we can have multiple conversations going across the state about pathways to further improvements.
Wow, that sounds great. I wonder if you could kind of help us understand better the full scope of what Solutions from the Land is doing across the U.S., maybe just to kind of help us understand it a bit better. What other things do you have going on outside of Iowa here in the U.S.?
So the organizing model that we've adopted has us working at the state level first and foremost. And we go to states where there's a readiness to have this conversation. Not everybody is. Some folks are still stuck in today and are in a defensive position, what I've called the 4D model, where they are being pressured from lots of places, and their strategy to respond is to duck, deny, delay, or deflect. And that consumes so much energy to do that. So it's hard to have this type of conversation when the wagons are circled and there's a lot of difficult decisions and arguments taking place. So we go to places where there's readiness. We started on the Delmarva Peninsula, the Chesapeake Bay, where after 30 plus years of government interventions, they weren't getting where they wanted to get as quickly as they could. And we found a readiness for the agricultural community, conservation partners, and government agencies to come together and say, time out. We all think we're trying to get to the same place. What if we step back and put our weapons down, whatever they are, and had a fresh conversation about pathways to get there? And out of that grew the Delmarva Land and Litter Collaborative that involves 3 states, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, primarily the Eastern Shore Peninsula, working together to create a vision and pathways for sustainability. We've been in North Carolina, helping the agriculture and forestry sectors develop a climate smart agriculture action plan for the state. That was the second state we went into, and we chose it intentionally because, like Iowa, it's a big red state, and the politics of climate change are familiar all across the country. And we said, what would happen if we had a conversation about changing climatic conditions in a rural red state? And Lois Wright Morton, former rural sociologist at Iowa State, is on our board and taught us many years ago that there's a right way and a wrong way to have these conversations. The wrong way is to talk about climate change. The world is on fire. Agriculture is doing things wrong. And what do we need to do to save the world? And what we learned is when you start the conversation about how are farmers doing? What's keeping you up at night? What are you struggling with? What do you need? They quickly describe changing climatic conditions, whether it's unpredictable weather, intense storm events, whether it's in the emergence of endangered species, disrupted productivity. They describe what science is telling us is happening. We then shifted in North Carolina to, okay, if that's real, what do you need to do to adapt and be more resilient? And boy, they came up with a lot of things. And then we helped them see that by adopting those measures, they became more resilient. And the surprise was that the co-benefits were actually what the world was looking for. The co-benefits were reducing carbon intensity, enhancing biodiversity, improving water quality. But we framed it around how can they be more economically viable and sustainable. So we've been there. We're in the state of Florida. We've been in Missouri, Ohio, Colorado, Wyoming, and we have limited bandwidth, so we don't want to get out ahead of our skis. But it's so exciting to see these emerging conversations. And the newest state we've entered into is the state of Indiana. And Indiana is a lot like Iowa, one of the I states, obviously. The conditions that they're experiencing are not unlike what farmers in Iowa have. And they're going down a very similar path, but constructing a roadmap for Indiana. And it'll be different than the roadmap in Iowa. So we play the role of convener, facilitator. I describe it as the neutral table that leaders gather around, and the leaders lead it. We help them. We're the secretariat. We order the coffee. We help them write their report. But this work is all in Iowa, led by Iowa Smart Ag. And we're fiercely defensive in that space. There are a lot of other groups that want to work with the agricultural community for some outcome, but they have typically an agenda, an approach that they want the farm community to adopt. We don't deploy and use that approach. We come in and ask them what they need and then help them build programs to deliver the outcomes they're looking for.
Sounds super helpful, Ernie. Shifting to a couple questions from the Q&A submissions. Anything from the farmer discussions in terms of what solutions might, looking at the carbon piece, emissions and removals, what pieces of that puzzle seem most likely to be able to scale, maybe looking at from the farmer perspective? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's several that they've been talking about, and some of them are quite familiar. So obviously modifying tillage practices and scaling up reduced till, no till, scaling up cover crops are important and immediate pathways. But the interesting part of the conversation in Iowa was, again, back to the circular economy. So for a lot of producers, that's changing what they're familiar with. That's going to require investments, at least of time, experimentation. So there better be something in it for them that they can really grasp and see. And one interesting model that this group has come up with goes to the importance of the livestock industry in Iowa. A lot of animals, a lot of hogs, a lot of cattle, a lot of poultry. Those operations are struggling too, trying to remain profitable and address environmental challenges. And the 21st century agricultural production platform now is producing clean energy. And what we're realizing that there is a significant opportunity to scale up renewable natural gas production in the state. So building a more efficient digester is part of it. But what goes in the digester is maybe even more important than how efficient it is. And what we've discovered is that there can be a mutually symbiotic relationship between a corn bean farmer, as an example, and a livestock producer.
Sure.
So the farmer could plant cover crops and harvest the cover crop and sell the cover crop into the livestock operation to enhance the effective functioning of the digester.
Oh.
So the producer of the farmer is getting a benefit because there's a value for the cover crop that's coming off. There's a new revenue source. The livestock operator is benefiting because the productivity of the digester is going up. And there are byproducts, the digestate that comes out of the digesters that can go back on cropland to, in a circular economy model, reduce the need for purchase inputs. So we think that just one example is ripe for growth in Iowa, because the world is heading to replace fossil fuel with renewable fuels, or at a minimum, lower carbon intensity fuels. And Iowa already is demonstrating that renewable natural gas is another tool in their toolbox, along with solar energy, wind energy, biofuels. The gas component, when you look at markets like California that are providing a premium price because they're valuing through their low carbon fuel standard that cleaner gas, that is going to be another incentive that will help diversify agriculture in Iowa and move it more towards a circular system.
That's super. We definitely interested in all of those areas and see potential as well. Another question from the chat is talking about the role of young farmers in these sustainability and circular economy issues. Are young farmers getting the training and engagement that they need to play a role and bring some of these elements into their operation? Just any thoughts about the young farmers in this process?
Well, when we brought the Rolodex out and started to jot down the names who we wanted to put on the work group, there was a clear recognition we needed to have some fresh faces, some younger producers. So we were successful in recruiting any number of them. So Kelly Blair, one of our co-chairs, is a younger producer. I'm trying to remember all the names of the folks on there. Mitch Hora is a younger producer. I'm scanning down my list just to try to pull people out by age. Jason Russell, another younger producer. They have their own networks with their peer groups across the state. And they have helped us realize that sometimes the younger producers are more open to experimentation, to taking risks, not reckless risks, but measured risks. So they have been very helpful in helping us not just look through the lens of the 60 to 65, 70-year-old producers who don't have as long a planning horizon, and their input is critical. So as we work now in the next phase of starting these listening sessions, we're going to be really prioritizing that and looking for opportunities to connect with folks that are going to be in it for 30, 40 years going forward.
One question is the role of soil health, which has been part of a lot of ag discussions lately. Expand at all on how you see this picture of soil health as fitting into these carbon and circular economy discussions?
Critically important, but not the silver bullet. And I think that's how we've been talking about it, that soil health is the foundation for productivity. But if all you focus on in soil health is on soil health, and you, for instance, don't pay attention to water management, you're not going to get to where you're trying to go. So the soil and water systems are intricately connected and interdependent, and they need to be managed in the system. And tomorrow in New York, we'll be presenting at the UN Water Conference. We're involved in 4 UN platforms: the Climate Convention, FAO in Rome, the United Nations Environmental Program, and the United Nations Water Conference. So this is the first time they have met. I think it's in 45 years. And we saw a critical need to put agricultural water management on the agenda at this gathering of 193 nations around the world. And we proposed an event and it was accepted. So drawing back to our roots, one of our senior advisors is Jerry Hatfield, who is from Iowa, former head of the USDA lab there in Ames. And Jerry is going to be keynoting our session at the United Nations tomorrow, talking about managing water as part of an integrated circular systems approach to farming. And obviously we'll embrace and support any initiatives that improve soil health. But Jerry has shared with us an observation as a scientist that perhaps we haven't put as much emphasis on water management as we should. So that's the message that they'll be delivering tomorrow, along with one of our farmer envoys from California, that we need to, if we're going to be feeding 10 billion people sustainably by mid-century, if we expect to improve the environment, if we expect to improve quality of life, we have to do a better job of managing water resources, whether those are rain-fed or irrigated resources, managing surface water, groundwater, water use efficiency. They're all nested together. So maybe a long-winded answer, but of course, soil health strategies are absolutely essential. But if we only focus on that as a silver bullet, we'll fall short.
Just expanding on that international theme just a little bit, based on prior meetings, just any reflections on engaging farmer collaborators, how important that's been, or how that's worked out in past engagements internationally?
Well, that's a great question. And it's why we've chosen to prioritize so much of our time and energy in the global space. We started going to global forum meetings where the future of agriculture is being shaped back in 2007 or 8, where Fred Yoder, one of our co-chairs, went to a COP that was held in Poland. And agriculture wasn't even on the agenda. And it was a wake-up call that the world was missing a solution pathway that we're about. So a number of us teamed up and went to COP 15 in Copenhagen back in 2010. And it was the first time agriculture had a day where there was going to be some attention focused on it. And another Iowa connection, as Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilwalk, attended the Agriculture Day with us and helped us. We teamed up in rallying the decision makers within the Climate Convention to elevate agriculture as a priority. Today, we've come a long way. And in November of last year, we took a team of 8 farmer leaders to COP 27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, and intervened formally, because we have standing within the United Nations, with farmers at the forefront of delivering the message. And their messages focus on a series of guiding principles that are on our website. And the very first one is that if the world wants to solve agricultural problems, you must put farmers at the center. You must be science-based. You must use all tools in the toolbox. You must enable producers. Don't prescribe to producers. So those are the cornerstones of our policy papers that we deliver and intervene in those 4 platforms that I mentioned. And what we have observed is that while we're there defending and promoting the 21st century renaissance of agriculture as being an engine for delivering outcomes, there are well-organized, highly effective groups there with the opposite agenda and message. And their message is that agriculture is broken. Innovation and technology have accelerated the devastation that modern day industrial agriculture causes. We need to totally rethink our dietary approach to the environment and switch to a plant-based diet. So you watch these coalitions of a plant-based diet, environmental activists, the social justice groups that have been concerned about exploiting smallholders, nutrition and health stakeholders. They've found common ground in beating up on agriculture. So they have the ear of policymakers in all of the conventions that we're involved with. And it's just reinforced to us the importance to send farmers into these complicated, complex, time-consuming people often think of almost irrelevant forums, but they're not, because one way or another, countries around the world are going to make decisions about the future of agriculture. And if we're not there to offer the way forward, the void will be filled by others with a different agenda. So again, another perhaps too long of an answer, but we prioritize our global work and spend over half of our time in that space. And the heart of it is deploying real farmers who show up and intervene and offer their perspectives based on real world experience.
We have time for just, I think, one last question, kind of give you a choice for getting questions about biochar and Iowa perspectives on phosphorus. Any thoughts from your farmer groups or your vision in terms of either of those components of the puzzle?
Well, maybe I'll take biochar. It's another example of a well-known pathway, and the world has been utilizing biochar technologies in one form or another since going back to the birth of mankind. Now we haven't figured out yet how to more efficiently and appropriately scale the use of biochar as a solution pathway for enhancing productivity, sequestering carbon, but we think there's a lot of opportunity. And again, with innovation technology, with improved efficiencies in producing biochar at scale, we think that has a lot of promise. But just like with soil health, it's not a silver bullet. And as long as we think of a toolbox with lots of tools that need to be fashioned and utilized on a site-specific basis, we can get a lot done.
Oh, wow. That's sounds fantastic, Ernie. And unfortunately, we're about out of time, and we want to thank you so much. Thank you for being with us and sharing your expertise and answering a number of questions. That was just great. We learned a lot about farmer engagement and leadership, circular economy in this space, and a lot to learn from that. And thank you again, Ernie. Great to see you, and this worked out really well.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. And I would just close by saying the most rewarding part of my job is working for farmer leaders at the state level, at our board level, at the national level, and with those envoys that deploy with us overseas, because they're the experts. We're here just to facilitate their good work. So to Ray Gasser, Brian Sievers, Kelly Blair, our entire leadership team, congratulations to them.
Absolutely. And thank you again, Ernie. With that, I'll turn it over to Kalina. Any closing comments or notes about next time?
Thank you so much for joining us today. Our next conversation about carbon is Wednesday, April 19th at 12 p.m. Today's session will be posted online, so feel free to check it out again or share it with all of your colleagues. Thank you.